Welcome, dear participants of the EU conference, as we call it at IAB, dear virtual participants, dear on-site participants. My name is Bernd Fitzenberger, and I would like to warmly welcome you once again to our conference, Labor Market Transitions, Challenges for Public Research and Policies. The other way around, public policies and research. At the occasion of Germany's EU Council presidency in 2020, IAB is most happy to host this event. This conference will focus on various topics concerning labor market transitions and the evaluation of policies that governments implement to smooth such transitions. The conference will feature about 40 scientific paper presentations with 10 minutes presentation each and 5 minutes Q&A. Also, the conference includes perspectives from key decision makers engaged in the European labor market policy. We will bring research and policymakers together via discussion also among the virtual participants. The topic of the conference, labor market transitions, is very broad. It's highly relevant for the scientific community, for the public, and for the policymakers. All over Europe, labor market transitions, for example, transitions from school to work, from unemployment to work, or from parental leave to work, are challenging for individuals. This is the case in particular during a pandemic. A pandemic partly freezes the labor market, and therefore transitions are the first things which encounter difficulties, which are staggered, which are delayed, and this will be a core issue during the next 3 days. Individuals apply strategies to cope with resulting challenges, and governments implement policies to ease successful labor market transitions. Think about the apprenticeships premiere, which the German government implemented, among many other things during this summer. This conference aims to expand our knowledge in a European perspective on the importance of labor market transitions for individuals' lives and on the role of governments in adapting to changes in demographic and technological change, or other pertinent developments like the COVID-19 pandemic. The organization of this hybrid conference is uncharted territory for all of us, and therefore we are very excited and hope that everything will run smoothly throughout the course of this conference. For weeks, and as I heard this morning, also including the last weekend, many people at IAB have been working under high pressure to make this event possible. We are now truly happy that this is finally about to begin. To set the scene for the conference from a German perspective, I will now discuss some issues of interest regarding the vocational training system. I will be very eclectic, emphasizing some work done at IAB, including people in the audience, in the physical or online audience. I will draw on exemplary research findings from the IAB. Afterwards, I will introduce the 4 keynote speakers of the conference, give a short description of the keynote speakers. They will be well introduced by the chairs of the session. So, let me go through the following agenda. Some personal comments on the role of vocational training for labor market transitions in Germany. And then I will highlight 3 exemplary research studies done at IAB, which I think fit the theme of this conference. And I'll get to them later on, and then I will reintroduce the keynote speakers. So let me start with my own personal observations on the topic of the role of vocational training for labor market transitions in Germany. The apprenticeship system, the German style as it often called, or German German-speaking country style. I see somebody from Switzerland here. Kind of apprenticeship system is the most important route traditionally for school-to-work transitions for non-college bound youth. It's considered to be a reason for the low unemployment rate in Germany, the low youth unemployment rate in Germany. Sorry, there is a typo. It involves very specific but highly labor market relevant skills being acquired during this apprenticeship phase, while the young worker gets work experience and training in the firm and at the same time in vocational schools. And this acquiring these specific skills and acquiring the experience of work experience, the work experience at the same time, eases the entry into the labor market. It's also part of a career sequence for a smaller share of those acquiring the degree. It's the first step to become a master craftsman, master craftswoman, to start even your own business. This is in particular important in the trades. And a lot of people also think this specific training, practical training, is a key component in the quality assurance of what is being produced, what kind of services, products are being produced, be it in manufacturing or be it in services being in the trades. However, there are a couple of caveats, a couple of worrying developments which basically, to some extent, threaten this system. Over the last years, over the last decade, we see a decline in the willingness of firms to train apprentices. The share of firms offering apprenticeships, the number of apprenticeships being taken has been declining over the last 20 years. The willingness of better students in the middle track, in middle track schools in particular, has declined to start an apprenticeship. An increasing share of students acquire an upper track secondary schooling degree and move on to tertiary education. There is a strong gender bias in vocational training. The traditional dual firm-based vocational training system is a male thing. A strong majority of apprentices are males. The share of females is way below 50%. In contrast, there is a second system, the school-based vocational training system, which in particular trains for occupations in the health sector, in the nursing sector, in education. That has a strong female bias. The share of individuals who get their school-based vocational training degrees is higher for female. There are more females, and this system has gained importance given the rising importance of employment in education, in nursing, also in the health sector. The age at which students turn into apprentices, at which apprentices start their apprenticeship, has increased over time. We are way above 16-year-old, 15-year-old now. Apprentices are typically, on average, older. And that has always been a problem, of course, or an issue. Students find it very difficult to decide upon a specific vocational training route which they are going to take. They find it very hard to decide at an age of 15, 16, 17, what is their path, what is their career in life. And there is the concern by taking up the wrong occupation in which you get your training degree, you may get on a route in the labor market which does not pay off, is not the right thing, does not pay off for you personally in the long run. And this is particularly an issue in a crisis where students are very uncertain about their future and where to go, and there is a tendency to remain in the schooling system. We will hear about that more. Also, the tendency to remain in the schooling system is matched by various offers, by various routes the schooling system offers to obtain a higher schooling degree. Second degree acquisition is very high in Germany, and acquiring a second higher degree, an academic degree from the upper track of the schooling system, enables transition to the tertiary system. So this may create a vicious circle threatening the traditional dual vocational training. At the same time, there is a sizable and a very sluggishly falling share of students who do not end up obtaining a vocational training degree, and those for whom tertiary education is not an option. For those, the labor market future labor market prospects are quite poor. Also, I should mention, in addition to the gender differences in the vocational training decisions, there's also a bias with regard to migration background. The interest in obtaining an apprenticeship degree is much lower among youth with a migration background, and consequently we see a higher share among youth with migration background not to obtain any vocational training degree at all. So these are some general remarks and input for discussion. Let me move to 3 selected exemplary research papers at IAB, which have come out recently. The first paper is by Juliane Achatz, Kerstin Jahn, and Brigitte Scheels. Brigitte Scheels is in the audience here physically. It's about non-standard routes, vocational training measures in the school to work transitions of lower qualified youth in Germany. So the group I've been talking about at the end of my remark. First of all, what is really nice about the paper is that it doesn't just focus on one transition, what we used to call, or what we call in Germany, the first transition. The paper takes a life course perspective, and it uses sequence cluster analysis to cluster the kind of transition patterns we see over time. Not just one transition, you leave school and then start a certain vocational training, but instead what happens afterwards and what will be what is going to be successful and what is not. The data uses, and that's also a trademark at IAB, uses innovative administrative data. On the one hand, administrative data from career counseling of the BA, the Federal Employment Office, and on the other hand, the integrated employment biographies, which are most importantly here used for checking on, having information on the employment episodes and which kind of employment transitions take place. What's interesting about the integrated employment biographies is that they also record vocational training at a firm as an employment spell. So you can really nicely put those two data sets together. The authors look at individual monthly labor market transition trajectories, not just one transition, and classify them. They look at the under 21-year-old school leavers. This sort of indicates this fairly high age by which now people start their vocational training as school leavers. And it's based on data for 2008, so covering almost a decade of outcomes afterwards. So, unsurprisingly, when serious academics look at such a topic, they find that things are very complex. There are very complex patterns, and there is no one, but that's also typical for Germany. There is not a linear path towards success in the labor market. There's no clear-cut distinction between successful and unsuccessful trajectories. The good news is, but this was a good labor market the authors were looking at, there's only a small number of youth experience at-risk trajectories characterized by a highly discontinuous transition process. Another good news is that when pre-vocational training, so this alternative school-based system where youth can stay until they find their path into the labor market, is combined with alternative vocational training programs. This seems to help school-to-work transitions of low-educated school leavers. There's further ongoing research at IAB which looks into how these transition patterns are related to further labor market outcomes, and analyze, and that's particularly important today, analyze the change of patterns in school-to-work transitions in response to changing macroeconomic conditions. And we are today in the pandemic in a situation where macroeconomic conditions change strongly. The second kind of research I would like to look at also involves two of the organizers, Malte Sandner and Alex Pazina, and also other people in the room, Silke Anger. These are findings from an evaluation study, from a survey done in the last grades of upper track German high school, where the Federal Labor Agency introduced a counseling program, additional counseling program to give advice to students about their professional careers, their vocational training plans. And while doing this one survey as part of that research project, they were interviewing these students during the pandemic. And so that's a nice side effect. The study allows to see how these students are affected by the pandemic. We're not talking now about results regarding this counseling activity, but we're talking about results regarding what's going on during the lockdown in those schools among those students who were interviewed. The first kind of results, they have been published in the media or discussed in the media also, is about how much time did German high school students, upper track German high school students, spend studying daily during the school closing. And I'd like to focus here on the dark blue bar. The dark blue bar are those who do study less than 2 hours. All respondents, this is almost 30%, almost 40%, above 35%. And let's see some findings regarding different groups who are differently affected by the pandemic. Females and males, there's a strong gender gap. Males study much less than females. Only 30% of females say that they study less than 2 hours per day, but way more than 45% of males say that they study less than 2 hours. There's also a gradient with regard to performance in school. High-performing students study more. Low-performing students study less. There's obviously also a difference by frequency of receiving digital learning opportunities, by being in, whether you are in good contact or not with your school. If there is daily learning opportunity, daily contact by the school, as I read this, then only 30% study less than 2 hours. If there is at least once a week, it's way above 40%, and less than weekly contact means even studying less. So all this points to the risk also that in terms of educational outcomes, there will be more inequalities. I think, if I'm not mistaken, all these indicators work in the way that those students who do on average more poorly also study less. So it's likely that inequality will increase, assuming that also in this cohort females do better than males. Another interesting, and that's more related to the topic of career planning, of vocational, possibly deciding for a vocational training route in their further training, is how worried are these students about their future in the midst of the pandemic. I think this was being asked in April. All respondents are concerned about their academic performance at the rate of about 45%. and concern about future career is lower. It's about a bit less than 30%. Now here, females are more concerned about both aspects than males. Males seem to be more relaxed. This is also a common pattern economists find in experimental settings. Females a bit also being concerned, a bit more risk averse. High-performing students, however, are less concerned than low-performing students. Before we saw low-performing students studying less, but being more concerned. So this may also generate a vicious circle of rising inequality. But this will, I'm sure the authors will follow up on this and look at this in the future. A third study I would like to talk about, also done at IAB recently, points to the importance of barriers to access into certain occupations. On the one hand, the specificity and the regulation of certain vocational training degrees of entry into certain jobs guarantees access to a job, guarantees quality in what is being produced. On the other hand, it may reduce mobility. And Basha Vikari and Stefanie Unger look at transition patterns between occupations, so occupational mobility, and investigate at a fairly descriptive and very refined level how these aspects hinder or enhance mobility between occupations. And if you're stuck, if you do a very nice vocational training degree in a certain occupation, but then you're stuck there, then the risk if this occupation is not providing job opportunities in the future is a serious concern if there is not sufficient mobility. The research question of the specific paper is how do characteristics of the initial and the target occupations, such as standardization of certificates, licensing, so you need to have a certificate to enter the occupation, and specificity of the skills acquired affect vertical and horizontal occupational mobility when changing the job. In addition, of course, holding individual characteristics constant. Again, there's a nice data angle here also, which characterizes work at IAB. On the one hand, IAB is involved in is one of the partners collecting the data for the National Education Panel Study. Again, Silke Anger and her group are involved in that. And the authors here used these data from the National Educational Panel Study with administrative data generated at the Federal Labor Agency, the Berufenet data, the German version of the ONET data for the international audience. And the ONET data in Germany has very refined, very detailed information today on occupations. So the study involves a number of results. It's clear that the characteristics of the initial and the target occupation affect mobility. It makes a huge difference with regard to licensing, certification, and also the specificity of skills. Mobility is higher when there is a barrier in the initial or the target occupation, but not in both. What's intriguing is that the authors find very strong interaction effects. I don't have the time to explain this into very detail, but if there is a barrier just on one side in the initial occupation or the target occupation, this does not mean that mobility is lower. It's slightly higher. But when barriers come together, initial and target, then we see very little mobility between those two occupations. So that's very interesting by itself. What's the strongest obstacle to mobility? It's actually not sort of these formal barriers like licensing or standardization of certificates. What's key, what's crucial, and as an economist I like that result, is the skill specificity here. This is maybe, I'm not sure whether I can show, oh, I can show here. This effect is the strongest, or one of the strongest. Also licensing is of course strong. And the blue bar, dark blue circle here again is the bad thing. No mobility. When licensing in the initial and target occupation, mobility is very low, and in particular also when skill specificity in the initial and target occupation is very low, then we see very little mobility. Okay, this was just meant to give you a short overview of 3 selected studies at IAB. Let me now come to introducing the keynote speakers, give a short overview of the 4 keynote speakers we have, top academics and decision makers here combined at the conference. First keynote speaker who has just arrived is Christian Dustman. He's the director of CREAM, the Center for Research and Analysis of Migration at the University College in London. He has published tremendously in all areas of labor economics and related fields, and he has also worked in the past a lot on the vocational training system in Germany. He also was for a number of years member of the Academic Advisory Board of IAB and has cooperated with IAB in many projects for a long time. He will give a keynote later this afternoon on the effects of changes in business taxations on firms, workers, and local labor markets. Second keynote speaker is Yuta Almendinger. She is the president of the Berlin Social Science Center, whereas Christian Dustman is an economist. Yuta Almendinger is a sociologist. She was also my predecessor as director of IAB, and she moved on to Berlin Social Science Research Center, I think in 2007. She will talk tomorrow about life course trajectories in times of COVID-19, a first assessment. Will be these are the 2 academic keynote speakers, and then we have decision makers. The first one, Dennis Radke, who is member of the European Parliament. And the preliminary title, he told us, he will talk about the Youth Guarantee Program, so a big European initiative to secure jobs or vocational training and for young individuals, especially in regions with high youth unemployment in various EU countries, and to ease their transition into the labor market to reduce youth unemployment. And the 4th keynote who will talk on Wednesday is Professor Laszlo Andor. He used to be Commissioner for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, and he is now at Corvinus University in Budapest. We are very happy to have him give a keynote on protecting jobs and incomes in the pandemic crisis. So also on the topic, of course, the pandemic crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, enters our conference. I've taken more time than I had been assigned to, but I started early. Before I let you go, however, I should finish now. Before I let you go into an exciting first day of our conference, I would like to express our sincere thanks to the organizing team of this conference, who did an excellent job as far as I can tell already, and I'm sure this will be a great success. Malte Sander, Alexander Pazina and Lisa Leschnik, you have planned an exceptional event with a great agenda and with excellent speakers, and you've taken all the turns you had to do during these unusual times where plans don't work out as you thought last week. An equally big thanks goes to the event team at IAB, in the IAB department PQI, which the event team is headed by Katrin Hoffmann. You have been investing so much time and energy in planning and now implementing this event. Of course, my thanks also go to all the helping hands behind the scenes. And last but not least, I would like to thank Miriam Schirmer, who I also see, who did a great job in communication and coordination, helping to organize this splendid event to foster communication between all the people involved. And now I wish you an interesting conference with many new scientific and political insights and lots of new ideas for discussions. Thank you.